Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about Stonewalls in Age of Empires 2. I made a similar video about the Palisade Gates a while back, and in that video I was needlessly angry at the Palisade Gate and kind of advocating for players to not build it for a bunch of reasons. But I have good news. For the Stonewall, it's actually quite a positive video, as I think the Stonewall is quite a nice building, but I will obviously talk about some of its drawbacks as well. It's not all going to be roses and flowers here when it comes to walling with stone. Now we'll start with the basics and we'll talk about what the Stonewall is, and then we'll talk about some of its uses and applications, and then talk about the pros and cons of opting to go for stone walls versus other defensive structures like castles and towers. So quite simply, stone walls are a defensive structure that costs 5 stone each and are available starting in Feudal Age. In Feudal Age, they have 1080 HP, and in Castle Age, they automatically upgrade to 1800 HP. The stone gate goes through similar changes, but with different numbers. The only upgrade is the fortified wall from the university, which gives them extra armor and puts them at 3000 HP, which is incredibly hard to burn through with any kind of unit. Now, stone walls are amazing for locking down your base, especially in Feudal Age and Castle Age. The reason for this is that they are basically pretty much unbreakable from units alone. They require forward siege or forward castle in order to break down the stone walls. Units alone just do very little damage, and it would take them far too long to break through stone walls reliably, giving the defending player way too much time to react to their pressure. So barring siege and forward castle, stone walls will keep you very safe for the majority of the game. This sounds like a great thing to invest into, and you might be wondering why we don't invest into stone walls pretty much every game, because staying safe from all units sounds like an amazing deal. Unfortunately though, the drawback is quite severe. Number one, stone walls are quite expensive, specifically for the early game. Later on, they become a little cheaper. We'll touch on that later. But early game, they are quite expensive. This is because stone is a limited resource, and you only start the game with 200 of it. And you also need stone for defensive towers and town centers once you get the castle age. So investing all of your stone early game onto stone walls to secure your base, while it does bring a lot of benefit, also holds some severe drawbacks, forcing you to make a mining camp and start mining stone, which will slow down your development and take resources away from military and upgrades, which are usually the priority in the early stages of the game. Another big cost to making stone walls is actually the villager build time. They build at a significantly slower pace than a palisade wall. So palisade walls and houses to cover your base early game are a much more tempting option when it comes to conserving your villagers' work time and while keeping in mind efficiency as a whole. Going for stone walls is basically a trade-off with whether you want a tight defense or whether you want villager efficiency and you want to develop into the later stages of the game, like playing towards Castle Age, for example. That trade-off is a very important one to keep in mind, because if you do go for these stone walls right off the bat, it is very likely that your opponents having no stone walls can get the Castle Age faster, which can lead to some complications and lead to them getting further ahead in terms of economy, as they have their 200 stone ready to set up their 3 TC boom. It's for that reason that I personally don't like to go for a full stone wall defense in Feudal Age. However, I do think there's some really nice application in late Feudal Age. After you had the nice development into Castle Age, I think going for a few stone walls to secure your map going into the Castle Age has a lot of merit, because in Castle Age, palisade walls end up being a lot weaker than they are in Feudal. In Feudal, they do a pretty reasonable job of keeping your opponent's army away, but in Castle Age, they die very fast to knights, they die very fast to step lancers, and they also die quite quickly to crossbows and cav archers. So they are not the most reliable form of defense, which is where I think the stone wall definitely tends to shine. So I think in late Feudal Age, early Castle Age, setting up some stone walls and sacrificing a little bit of stone to set up your base in a nice and defensive way has a lot of merit and is definitely worth looking into. I would definitely argue that at lower levels, stonewalling is a very nice strategy, because it makes it so you have a lot of time to react to enemy pressure, and it prevents you from getting raided on angles that you didn't think were possible. Stonewalling in general just makes the game a lot easier to play for you. Another use of the stonewall that the viewers especially love, it's not about walling your base this time, it's actually about walling the entire map. And this is a strategy more so towards like the later stages of the game, especially in a 1v1 where you want to lock down specific areas of the map and you want to get your stone walls from one side all the way to the other in order to secure space and important resources, including wood lines and hills and whatnot. This once again sounds like an amazing idea. Stonewalling the entire map will prevent raids from your opponents, will lock down a lot of space for yourself, and will keep you generally safe. Where's the downside to it? Well, the downside is once again in the cost of it, and this time there's an added layer of cost that is, in my opinion, very relevant that viewers seem to never take into consideration. Now at this point in the game, in the late stages like in Imperial Age, the 5 stone cost is not the biggest of deals. You know, that's kind of okay. It'll cost you like 200 to 300 stone, maybe up to 500 to secure the entire map with stone walls. So this cost is more or less negligible. It is still a decent chunk of stone, which is a valuable resource, but it's going to cost you less than a castle to fully stonewall the entire map, which is definitely a worth it trade. Now, the problem I have with this approach is another cost that needs to be considered, and that is how long it takes you to physically put those stone walls across the entire map. Now, APM is a very big topic in Age of Empires, or RTS in general, how fast you can do actions, how many actions can you do per minute. And when it comes to stonewalling the entire map, I think that's one action, or that's one strategy that takes a significant amount of time to do. You have to select your villagers, drag the stone wall across different portions of the map, and make sure you're walling in correct areas. Even if you have the best player doing this, it's going to take them a good 10 to 30 seconds to plan all of this out and to make it a reality. On top of that, you have to defend your villagers while they're building the stone wall, giving your opponent a good maybe like 5 to 10 minutes as he sees you doing the stone wall to react and send some troops and try to prevent you from getting that done. Him sniping your villagers, him running in when you're still building the wall, all of these are inconveniences that always happen in real games when you try to set up these stone walls. So it's the kind of approach and it's the kind of strategy that sounds a lot better than it actually is. Listen, if you can get it all done with no inconveniences and it just works perfectly and you don't miss out on anything else, then stonewalling the entire map is probably one of the best things you can do for a 1v1 late game, 100% without a doubt. But these inconveniences will pretty much always happen, and it's definitely worth taking this into consideration. So therefore, my suggestion is to only start stonewalling the map when you're ahead and when you have control of the middle of the map, then using that control to get some vision with outposts first to see where your opponent will raid you while you're setting up the wall, and then setting up the wall is the correct way to do this, and is the way to get you the best results with the least inconveniences and the least troubles. And the last use in this video is stonewalling the trade, and this is my favorite use for the stonewall because I think that this is a lot easier to do and it has so much value. In a team game, be it 2v2 all the way up to 4v4, players will usually trade across the entire map, so using stone walls and especially fortified walls to secure the entire map and protect your trade route from any raids is absolutely insane, and it's one of the best things you can do to protect that precious trade route, which is going to get you all the gold income. On top of that, it's very easy to justify using stone walls even with multiple layers because stone is going to be very easy to acquire once you have a trade route which gets you, in theory, infinite gold. Therefore, infinite gold means infinite stone, obviously over time, but you can easily buy that stone from the market and it's not going to be as costly as it is in the 1v1 where resources are more scarce. Furthermore, in team games, you have multiple members from 2 all the way till 4 on your team, so it's a lot easier to, share that responsibility. One guy walls one side, the other guy walls another side, and then you just meet through the center, and it usually is a lot easier to wall your trade than it is to wall the whole map in a 1v1. And this is why I personally love fortified walling your trade and keeping that secure for the late game in team games. And the last thing I want to talk about is that the stone wall is a relatively low cost in late game. 5 stone is really not the craziest thing to pay for, and so doing multiple layers of stone walls is completely fine and justifiable. Once you already have that first layer, it's a lot easier to justify adding in more and more layers because you have that natural protection, you're going to be controlling the map, and the 5 stone cost is really just not that big of a deal as you're going on into the late game. Comparing the stone wall to other defensive structures like castles and guard towers and even bomber towers, we can see that the stone wall will cover a much larger distance and will be a lot cheaper than using the other buildings as far as defending, your base and keeping raids out of your base. However, there are a few things that make the other fortifications a little bit better. Number one, they actually do damage and they will kill enemy units, which is a huge part of defending raids, actually thinning out the enemy army. And number two, fortified walls will not actually hold a position if your opponent has siege and is able to bust through the wall. If they just break one hole in the wall, they can enter your entire base, unless you have multiple layers, of course. And so in this case, a castle makes for a better stronghold or a better defensive area, so you can at least fight off the opposing siege and not just have a stone wall that's sat there doing nothing. So castles, towers, bomber towers will do a little bit better of a job at defending positions and at clearing enemy army, but they're obviously more expensive and they cover less ground as they only have like maximum 11 range, unless you include some unique techs, of course. And so to conclude, my take on the stone walls is that they are a very nice defensive option. They help you out in the early game and they are absolutely crucial in the late game. Although their high cost in the early game might make it a little bit unappealing, at least before you get your TCs down. After you get your town centers down, it's pretty much fair game. As soon as you get the stone, starting to stonewall areas of the map is usually going to be a good idea, as long as you do it in a safe way and you don't completely neglect the downsides of stonewalling. Listen, not every game needs stonewalls, but I do think the pros are sleeping on stonewalls a little bit. I think there's a really good chance that in the next few years we see stonewalling enter the meta in a very big way, and I hope to be the guy that's pioneering that, because I have a few ideas of stonewalling that I think have a lot of merit as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy the video. Let me know your thoughts on the stonewalls. Let me know if you guys are using stonewalls in your own games down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great great rest of your day. Check me out on Twitch and Patreon as well. Links in the description below if you haven't already. Peace.